want to welcome you all again. Thank you for being here. This is our third session, as you know, of the Library Visioning Task Force, and it's a really pivotal point in our process. So we're getting towards the end of our data collection and have quite a large data set now to review with you all. So it's definitely a wonderful time in the process. It was exciting for us to see the vision framework draft come together and some of the preliminary consultant recommendations, which are in the slide deck that you'll get to see tonight. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts and insights on all of that. I just thank you all again for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be part of this process. The role you play is so important. So before we jump in, and I'll hand it over to Jason in just a minute. I just want to remind everyone this is a public meeting, so it is being recorded. We have breaks planned into the agenda, but if you do need to use the restroom, feel free. It's just out and to the left down the hall there. And then, of course, feel free to refresh snacks or water as needed. So with that, I will turn it over to our consultant team. Again, we're very lucky to have Jason, JR, and Ruth with us tonight. So.
Hi guys, we'll be brief in introductions, but just as a reminder, it's Jason, my name is Jason Gang with Very Done, and really just thank you for allowing us to be part of your community. Also, thank you for coming this evening. But tell you what, I walked down and got some coffee with these guys before it is stunningly beautiful out there. So with that said, you guys are doing really important work. And can't thank you enough for all your time and effort. We have some pretty exciting stuff to share with you this evening. So Jason, pleasure to see you guys. See you, Jared. Go ahead.
I'm J.R. Clanton. I'm also a consultant with Very Done and happy to be back here and talking with one.
Who's next? Everybody.
So we'll go ahead and jump right in, give you an idea of the overview of this evening. But we want to just give a very brief refresher. I promise I will be brief. I'll be very brief because you guys have been part of this great journey through the planning and engagement process. But sort of as a reminder, kind of put into context, and certainly at any time this evening, you can stop us should you have questions. Just feel free. But otherwise, let us continue to move forward. We want to spend the bulk of the time and really getting your additional input this evening. That said, just as a reminder, sort of the journey that we're on, as we're at our task force meeting number 3 this evening. The last time we met, just as a reminder, we did start to review the community input to date. You'll be getting much more information about input to date during the next several minutes here when JR takes over. But I won't steal his thunder, but just as a reminder, we started reviewing that preliminary findings at the last meeting. We also discussed the resource and asset capacity snapshot, getting an idea of the current conditions and realizing capacity constraints and sort of opportunities, just as sort of a quick reminder. And the other thing, we looked at trends. We looked at trends in the field as far as the facility. You probably recall that. We had a lot of good discussions and whatnot, as well as just general observations from the library, from the team, as well, certainly sharing all of our great ideas that you guys shared during the last. Since we've met, we've been very busy, and it's so hard not to take the thunder, but I won't. All the indices, the focus groups, you'll be hearing a lot more about that in a few minutes, and you should be excited because there's a lot coming your way. The vision framework, as we mentioned, has been drafted. So we're going to dive into that more this evening, get your feedback, kind of see where you think we're at, how we're doing, get your thoughts. And since we met, really reviewing a lot of this information, project team of library staff and the consultants meets every week. They meet every single week, and the consultant team meets separately to continue to review all the findings. So kind of for background, just so you know, there's a lot of work done week to week, and things are going really well. Tonight, as I mentioned, we'll be discussing the vision framework. We're finding that preliminary information. It's preliminary because we definitely want to get feedback, your guidance, and see what you're thinking this evening. And then we do have our consultants' preliminary strategic recommendations. I think the word in there, consultants, might be a little interesting because we own that. It may not all be your recommendations. This is sort of what we see so far, just based on our experience in these types of processes. But we certainly want to own that it's so far it's what we're seeing. It doesn't mean it's right. So we'll be getting to that here in a few minutes. Just a snapshot, real quick, as I mentioned, we're at task force number 3. And then actually a slide might be a little hard to read that far, but task force 1 was on the community, vision, challenges and needs, as you probably recall. 2 was the roles of the library and the vision concepts, and this evening we went over, briefly, the community input. You're gonna get a lot more information on that, as well as tonight's focus is on the vision, framework. And task force, which will be our final meeting, we'll be wrapping up the vision framework built on all the great info we're gonna receive from you this evening. Any questions about our journey so far? Okay, good, thank you, much appreciated. Let's go right into the community input today.
Yeah.
You're gonna.
Let's keep this up. Let's talk about our comedian today.
I actually did a dance.
Highlight.
Well, sure. So we have had in-depth key informant interviews involving over 100 people. So those have been really wonderful qualitative conversations. Over 2,500 survey responses. That's where the dance came in. I remember that. We've actually had one more focus group today, so this slide could now be updated to say 3 focus groups and 1 to 2 more scheduled. Over 100 written comments, 119 to date. And that includes on the social pinpoint sites, comment cards, on the visioning boards that we've had around different facilities around town. We've also held 3 community forums and have 2 more scheduled in addition to the mayor's roundtable. So there's been a lot of input collected, and there's more opportunities over the next 2 weeks as we're wrapping up the process.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. 2,500 surveys is certainly a record for us, and that's just incredible survey numbers. And it's only growing. The surveys open another week. Actually just checked right before this meeting started, and you're at 2,675 right now. So we'll see how well we can do in the next week.
Last time we had this meeting, what was our survey number?
It's like 182 right now.
160 or something.
Yeah.
So since this meeting, we'll add a real update perspective. Go ahead.
And I think, as we talk about the community input and what we've received, it's amazing we've had amazing comments and in-depth discussions. I mean, we're tracking thousands of comments at this point. And we have focus groups, we have written comments, we have 2,500 survey responses. We don't ever recommend making a decision based solely on the data that we're collecting. What we want that data to do is start a conversation, and that's really the whole point of it. And so as we're going through the data and some of the summaries and some of the information, it's not necessarily important to get fixated on specific comments and say that's what we're going to do. Rather, it's important to have conversations about the comments and about the data we're seeing, and then let that go to discussions. And especially when you start getting to this amount of data, that's how we have to do it. So as a consulting team, what we're working on is how do you group this and how do you make this digestible? So in terms of the stakeholder interviews, these are the 4 key questions that we're asking and that we collect the data on. Challenges, goals, barriers, and future imperatives. And so a lot of this is very similar to what was presented to you last time. We had already conducted a lot of interviews. So I have the themes that we talked about last time up here. Under challenges, we grouped them into themes of affordability. These were comments related to, hey, it's expensive to live in Lake Oswego. It's expensive. There's lack of services for people who are experiencing low incomes or homelessness. Changing demographics was another topic that was talked about a lot. Conversations about younger families starting to move in, conversations about an aging population, and then also differences in the makeups of those populations and what the community used to be. We had discussions about what I call infrastructure, and this was really talking about the library facility specific challenges with that building. It's 40 years old. There have been some problems with it in terms of structural stuff. These are also things like infrastructure within the city being a challenge. People talking about how this is You have an infrastructure system that was originally built for a more rural type of population that's currently exists here. And so as this many people live here, that's a challenge, to accessing library services and a challenge for the community in general. And parking is also a big issue for others, kinds of a challenge. Then there's this concept of disparities between served and underserved. And these are comments that can be very specific and targeted, saying, hey, there's difficulties accessing the library, ADA access. There's some conversations we had which talked about racial issues and racial disparities and perceptions of racism. There's conversations that talk about the history of Lake Oswego and being not as inclusive of community as it is today, but how that legacy of racism permeated into modern day, you know, even if it's not realized, even if it's non-perceived. Simple things like, well, not so simple things, but even if you look at the makeups of certain communities that were originally populated without diversity and how those, how that's remained in some areas. So those are some of the questions. But again, those are also perception, but there's also perception comments. And then really just if you just think about it, discussions like differences between those who have in terms of accessing services, geographic location also came into play. And then the new one that I added, based upon reading through comments, and it was coming up enough that it warranted getting its own category. And this is new this time, is that resources category. And this was talking about comments that were talking about, hey, there's a lot of competing resources right now, or a lot of needs in the city competing for resources. There's infrastructure needs, and when you start thinking about all the needs that the city has and the cost of providing services in the city, that's a challenge. And that started to come up enough that it gave it its own category. Okay, so under rules of the library, these are the same common categories that were presented to you last time, a bit more refinement on them. Again, welcoming for everyone, a trusted source for information, a place for learning, and a place for gathering. And in these, the welcoming for everyone and trusted source of information are probably some of the most common categories. Welcoming for everyone is fairly self-explanatory. It means that it's an environment that's welcome for everyone, that people see themselves represented in the library. And also this concept of people are aware of happening in the library. A lot of people are making comments, well, I didn't know that the library was doing this. I didn't know that the library had this service, had this offer. And, making sure that not only does the library have all of these amazing resources, but that people are aware that they're there for them. And then trusted source for information. It spoke to this thing that if there's difficult conversations that need to happen in the community, the library is a place people trust that have that to get information and have that conversation. And then also just speaks to the quality of the information that's going on at the library. Place for learning was really speaking to going there for self-improvement, different types of literacy. And then place for gathering was also a common theme. People really want to have a place that they can go to read, that they can go to have human interaction, they can go to gather. Barriers to access. We did group these a little less than the report. We grouped into accessibility. Accessibility we brought in the definition. So this includes both location and ADA accessibility now. And then also being able to get there without the public transportation. The fact that right now it's really only accessible by car, especially because of geographic location. Barrier to access also is building condition and amenities. And honestly, it's parking is a big one. Also, building having trouble with aging systems. And then again, this concept of awareness. And I don't want you all to have a complex about the awareness. The awareness. And that's universal. Every library we work with struggles with this. It doesn't matter how much you promote something and how much you get the word out, there's always gonna be a large section of the community that doesn't know what it is. They don't, we don't necessarily know what the answer is to this. If you'll ever find it out, you're holding on to a really good idea and you should try to capitalize on it. But basically, it really comes down to libraries serve a whole multitude of mini populations, right? You don't just have one homogeneous population that you're serving. You're serving a ton of different mini populations in your community. And each one of those populations is going to have a different preference for how they're reached and what they're doing. So you must have a multifaceted communication campaign. There's going to be people who want flyers, who want emails. There's going to be people who want to hear it from the court when they're checking it out. There's going to be other people who want to read about it on the website. Those who want to read it on, 10 different types of social media platform. And we just have to make sure you're continuing to cater to all of the different communication preferences and continuing to tell your story. Advocacy is also another thing that's come up quite a bit, and we lump that in with awareness too. And then finally, future imperatives. These are the same that you saw last time. Another location. Making sure that whatever the library does, it does it in a way that flexible to one of the future needs of the community. Certainly updating the building and amenities seems to be the existing building. There are no gathering spaces, the systems are aging, there probably could be meeting rooms. There's just things that the building needs to be modernized. And then continuing to be welcome, a place that people gather, a place that people see themselves, a place that truly welcomes. So any, questions or comments on the interview so far? I know it's, very similar to what we talked about last time. Yeah,
I have a friend who, when I told her I was on this visioning task force, she said, "Oh, I was on one of those a few years ago," and like that's we go. So I wondered if you had looked at because she started talking about some of the same things that we found that we know are still there or that people still want. And I wonder if you're incorporating or kind of looking at what that past survey and information sessions do to inform what you've got going forward, to see what might have been different, what maybe was addressed, but maybe not well enough, that kind of thing. At the time, I think they were talking about probably using redevelopment funds, which in order to build this building, they used it all up for down here. And so they were looking at the corner state, I think, at AI or BI or whatever, to build a new building that would house a library in it with also living spaces or whatever. So I didn't know if you had that.
Yeah, we do have that information, and it was part of, all those reports were uploaded. So I'm guessing your friend was referring to the prep work before the 2012 bond measure that did fail. And all of that information that was part of that process was shared with the consultant team. That said, feel free to after this. I think it was informative to look at, but we haven't really used that data because quite a bit of time has passed.
Not to use it, I've not used it as data so much as to just kind of see, because the community has grown. But I think a lot of the people that are here still have the same feelings about, and we didn't respond last time, for whatever reasons. So where do we go now that we're getting new information?
Yeah, I agree. We have seen it, and I think the other thing I would add is several of our interviews and our focus groups have included people who were involved heavily with the last campaign, including new communities and things like that. So we are getting that perspective there.
Thanks.
Do you have any information about why it failed?
I can speak to that. I wasn't here at the time, but just from what my sense from the many conversations that I've had is that there were a number of reasons. It was competing with the Boonesbury project on the same ballot, and that project, they had spent about 2 years talking about that and getting the word out in the community. And the library item was fairly short. It was kind of put on there, and I think the assumption was everyone wants the library.
Yeah.
We're number one of our size in the state of Oregon, like this is gonna pass. And again, I wasn't here at that time, that this may be slightly off, but that's my sense. Then another piece of it is that folks didn't want to spend a lot of money to move the library just a few blocks
Yeah.
from where it was located, and so that location and concept was not quite right. I think there's a lot of love for the art grant facility. I think that was part of it too, because I've heard a lot of people say, we love the library,
Right.
but that just wasn't the right. Right.
I think you said this, but I think that, and obviously I wasn't involved in that at all time, so I'm not judging or anything like that. But as I'm reading and as we're conducting our engagement, it's also very much actually about engagements and engaging more of the community in these conversations. And I'm not at all saying, please don't take this the wrong way, that may have happened last time, but there's a perception that we didn't, that process did maybe reach out as grand as maybe, people would have liked. And by the way, that's common. People say there's never an awareness. In fact, I think you had that in a different slide a minute ago. So in fact, what we were targeted as a consultant team, knowing that was to do the best we could to get as much engagement as possible in this process. And of course, it's not just about, it's not the funding measure, it's more about across all services. What is the library's in the community? What do you think it is? What does it fit? What are the roles that it plays? And so I think some level of, there certainly is nothing but love for the library, but I think there was folks that maybe weren't part of those conversations and maybe some opportunities to be further engaged.
I was also here at the time. I think one of the things that we have heard was that bond was really a facility oriented bond. And through this process, we tried to, and you're going to part of this conversation, we didn't want to just focus on facility. We wanted to look at it as grand as possible. What are the services, amenities, and needs that this community needs? And then we can fine tune it and figure out what the best is. We don't know if we're going out for a bond either. And I think that's where that project had initiated we need a facility. This is the mechanism, which is a bond. We don't even know if that is the route we're gonna go because we don't know the recommendations yet. And so I think we're coming from a place of curiosity to begin with, rather than an idea of what the next step is. And maybe that was just a difference of a process.
Well, it's so funny because I know I was on council and I'm like, did what? Wait, where? We did, and I worked on Bloomsbury Road from the time when I was a transportation advisory board and
Yeah.
for years and years and years, we worked on Bloomsbury Road. So that was a topic for a lot of stuff. And infrastructure for the council at that point in time, there was a lot of this. I mean, that was a very interesting time. And that was a time when that was what was critical. Get that done. And so, it's so funny. I don't it had to be just as I was thinking, oh.
Well, that's an interesting observation about the difference of Bloomsbury Road. So Bloomsbury Road also had an advisory. They had the PAC for a while, I think is what it was called. But how much community organizing had been part of Smith Board, which the concept planning, what was going to be what was the public art? And so I think in some ways, 10 years later, we're almost nearing that same process of what is the ask and fine tuning that before ever even thinking, is that the direction we're going to go? So thank you for your involvement on that one too.
It makes a very big difference.
My understanding, I wasn't here, but I was nearby and aware of what was going on at the time and it struck me as I learned about the process that it was very sort of solutions oriented, like, versus this is really more of a step back and look at a the citywide was the service area, which is beyond the city, right? Kind of step back and what is the vision for the future? And that's a very different orientation than going to a solution that, as other people have pointed out, it didn't really involve a lot of people and that was going to be not too far from the existing library. And so I think that was, from my outsider looking in perspective, was, you know, probably flawed in that sense, you know. And I did want to say something too about the awareness issue, because I agree with Jay, or has said, generally speaking, you see this in every community. People have great demands on their time and their attention. And so even if you do a magnificent job of getting the word out, people, even, you know, very engaged people don't know this or they don't know that. First of all, there's a lot to know about the things the library does. It's impossible to keep track of it all, even if you're the director, you know. But I think the other thing the thing that might be uniquely not in the world, but in this situation, is that awareness, I think, is a feature of accessibility. Because when you have the library in this community here, you know, the further away from that center you are, the less likely you are to be as aware. You might be paying attention to what's going on in the Western, you know, adjoining library communities. And because that's where you go, or you go somewhere else. And so you're not even aware of what's in your own library. And I do think that in this case, because of the proximity issue and topography and geography, that make it difficult for people, really more difficult to get to it if they're far away, really is an accessibility issue to me in this case, not as solely, but in a fairly large way.
And I think as we go through the presentation tonight, you see some of our recommendations and what we're talking about for next steps. You know, it's when we get to it, but you'll see what we're recommending is an exploration of future service delivery models to consider. Okay, so some new things that have happened. So since we last met, two focus groups were held. One with the fifth grade leadership from River Grove, and the other one with the River Grove PTO. And these were conducted by Christine Moses, who is our DEI expert on this project. They really allow us to have a more in-depth look at what issues are important for that group of people. And so it's good that we were able to get that. It's parents in our community, as well as children in our community. So some highlights from this. Again, this information is being included in our massive findings set. But talking about barriers of access, this is what they said were their barriers. Distance, dungeon-like quality of reading nooks for the lowest. Need a brighter space. Strollers on the elevators are hard. Kids level, not being in the basement rather. Not enough room to hang out or read for teens. Need OVOV books on display.
OVOV is the Oregon Battle of the Books. So it's a Jeopardy-like game that kids related to titles selected by state library.
That's pretty cool.
It's super
Really, more commentary you want here, I actually got to be one of the game show facilitators down in Springfield, Oregon, about 12, 15 years ago. I gotta tell you, you never, we saw it is like the coolest thing. You're like literally in a game show with kids. I mean, it's all like filming up there, but you get to kind of and the knowledge that the kids had about the books, it will be away. So I love that program. Sorry, that's it.
It is.
I know.
And then the tech is on the top floor in Hardin. I'm not sure.
One
Oh,
of the
sorry,
things,
go ahead.
well, just one of the things I wanted to mention, this interesting conversation I had with, a mom, at the, community forum last time we were here, and, she was talking about feeling unwelcome on the main floor of the library. And I said, you mean by staff? He said, oh, no, staff's great. She said, other patrons. And I think this too is an issue of space. Because people do come in and maybe they want a place to read the newspaper. And mom comes in with two kids and they're trying to get downstairs and she wants to, or dad, and they want to do a little browsing before they head down there and that sort of thing really, I mean, it's unfortunate that she felt, and she was very clear about it, that it hadn't happened just one time, and that it hadn't happened just to her, but the moms talked. And then she said, I just feel banished to the basement. And so I think that's one of the things that can be alleviated by, it's another issue of none of space. People can have zones and kind of coexist.
What do you love about the library? You like the family bathrooms, the library of things, so a reading program. In fact, the librarians come to events in the community, and the drop box on the side of the lake. What they want. An annex on this side of the lake. Lockers for books on hold. Fireplace, that seats 30.
Wonder,
No,
make them do that.
as you know, we don't edit their comments. Okay. Woodhard, Alex was Brown for reading. Give an example, the Hillsborough Library, the amazing ponds there, play area, longer hours, a copier for public use, game night for students, electronic registration for entire family, a family account. And Wellington Library Archives. Did I get that out of towner pronunciation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
I don't know where, wow, yeah.
Good. All right, and so, yeah, so that was sort of some of the insights, and so I think like, key takeaway from that, obviously. It gets included with all the data we're viewing when we're considering recommendations, when we're considering what is the community telling us. And again, it's just another way to get more insights to the community about what they want and what they're perceiving. Any questions or thoughts or comments about that for focus group? I guess the other key thing here is that nothing we really heard there is conflicting with the other findings or the vision framework as presented. And generally speaking, our comments, our interview questions, survey data, and our focus groups really are supporting the vision framework that's been developed and the direction in which we've been heading. And that is a key finding so far. So now something a little bit more fun with fifth graders. So, how do you feel when you walk in the library? On the picture. It's awesome.
It's have libraries in the race.
Did you never ever read some?
What you are seeing, I don't think it's the case, at Grove, you are seeing increasingly around the country, professional library staff are increasingly being cut from schools. And you're seeing it being filled by paraprofessionals or It's, yeah. And so it's, you know, so the importance of professional librarians at your community libraries is even stronger. Those research needs and, development needs.
In fact, today, in the focus group we had today, there was somebody who said so eloquently, and it really doesn't show up in the framework, though I think you all have talked about this, the last two, but what she said was, that she couldn't emphasize enough the importance of staff and valuing staff. And she went on to explain it's not just about that, it is about this mediation that real human beings provide, whether it's how I can, you know, how do I do this, or, you know, what I can read next, or that, and the real human, not AI, and, you know, not automated, but that quality, that you all have been talking about community. She was saying that having that continuity, you know, and, that's one thought that I've had since we gave you the developing framework, that maybe is understated in there, and at least want to throw that out to you as you're working in your little groups to think about that, because the way she phrased it just, to me, kind of folded in a lot of the things that you all have been saying about why the library works for you, you know. So, anyway.
No, it's well said. There really was that whole, a conversation about the importance of human connection came up again and again. And the important role that librarians play as a trusted, unjudging, professional resource for whatever the needs are. And talking about how the librarian's never going to make fun of you for not knowing how something works and will always have patience to work with you. And so these are barriers to access, different areas for different age groups, more hours, more copies of books so you don't have to wait, ways to donate books. And then this concept of feeling welcome, you know, and again, it's the theme we talked about earlier, you know, where, you know, as a child in a crowded area, you know, do I feel like I can make noise without getting in trouble? Or is that going to be okay if I'm here? Or people going to be okay if I'm here? And even though the answer to that is yes, it's still, you know, it's still something that these kids are aware of, feel sensitive to. And I think again, it honestly speaks, I think it's foundational in space. Any comments or questions about the fifth graders? So then as far as social pinpoint goes, again, surveys, this is unbelievable participation by the community. It's unbelievable. It's a really great glimpse of what's going on. So I know it's hard to read. I'm sorry. There's a lot of data. So here's what this is telling us. This is who responded and where are they from, what neighborhoods are they from. And so the top one is Mountain Park. The second one is I don't live in Lake Oswego. But remember that's to be expected because of reciprocal blending, what do you call it? Library card. Yeah, thank you, reciprocal. Yep. And the fact that the location of the library, it's on the east side of the city, proximate to other cities where that library is the most convenient library. So not surprising. I think all in all, I feel what's really interesting about this survey is just how many different neighborhoods are represented from throughout it. So even though it's a drive and it's not convenient, people are still at least interested in actually taking their time to respond to this survey. Are there any other comments you all want to make about the neighborhoods or the response rates?
We were just noticing how high, I don't live in Lake Oswego, and I realized it could be daytime population. So I would have wanted to put that out there as well as, our service area is larger than just like Oswego residents being Dunthorpe. It might be people coming over from Tualatin, Stafford area, being an unincorporated part of the county.
So we have about 4,000 unincorporated residents.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a little confused because it says I live in an unincorporated area, it's its own line.
Okay.
So I am, I guess, just curious what makes sense. I don't live in like Oswego, like local business owners or like people like. Because the unincorporated makes total sense to me. I'm just confused
Yeah.
that it's separate.
I think there's I'm sorry, there's also the fact, I mean, I don't know about this community, but in other communities where we've done surveying, people don't always know where they live. I mean, here, I mean, you got your neighborhoods, but somebody might say unincorporated. But they might also say, I don't live here. You know,
And I don't know, so that is
yeah,
possible if they.
I think the key is that they self-identify. So,
Right.
I mean, we, just doing the type of work that we do in communities, people will self-identify with a particular neighborhood that they want to identify with. So this isn't meant to say that we, use GIS or anything like that to map out where these responses are coming from.
Yeah.
We didn't do that. People are self-selecting and some level of response is likely selected a different neighborhood. In the whole scheme of things, that's okay, because we look at it from an overall sort of aggregate as well as discussion, to generate discussion. I think what is interesting to me to take away, because a lot of times you get, and not saying everyone's represented, but you do, at these types of efforts, have areas that aren't mentioned at all. And I look at the amount of areas that are identified here, this is significantly more than we see. And then when I look at the numbers of responses, as Wes was already celebrated, unbelievable, that amount of people that responded. So, yeah, you're gonna have people that self-identify in the areas that they want to identify in.
I'm really interested in how many people from the Palisades neighborhood have responded. Because Palisades is on the other side of the lake. It's harder to get to that library. And I will confess that in my fantasies, I've imagined we would locate another annex in Palisades. And I was like, so it's just because Palisades would be kind of centrally located, both on that side of the lake. So I'm just really interested to see how many people from Palisades are participating, which suggests passion and curiosity and interest in the library.
Palisades was 162, and it was the fourth most up there. And,
And so many of those neighborhoods border each other. I mean, we look at Glen Maury and Callahan Heights,
Yeah,
and they're all coming together there up at the top of Palisades. And you look at Mountain Park, it's just in a different direction away from where the library is located. So people use it regardless of how far they have to travel. But the travel part of it is what makes it difficult. Either if you're driving and you don't know you're gonna be able to park, or you don't have a car, is somebody gonna pick you up and take you? Those kinds of things.
Just logistically, and as we're doing the final stretch down in relation, do we know what Mountain Park did in terms of communication or encouraging people that helped them get such high responses? 270, like that huge. I know it's a big neighborhood association, but was there some effort that we could replicate in some of the other neighborhood associations that we are?
I can follow back up with the neighborhood chairs and see who had shared it out. So the neighborhood chairs were notified, some of the community organizations in the area were also notified, some of our partners like the Chamber and School District. I would need to ask the neighborhood chairs what their listserv is, because some of our neighborhood associations have a more robust registration, but we can definitely find.
Maybe that they actually.
Well, and I actually, when, from my observation, when we said the numbers, I was like, Mountain Park? Like, being the farthest corner, and you're right, if they have that reach, then we need to capitalize that for other cities as well.
Yeah.
Right, I think the same stage in South Park would be the largest area, that have more apartments and condos up there, so you have a higher concentration. You look at Palisades has 2,000 houses, and you got just under 10%, but you've got Glen Maury that has 200 houses, you've got So when you start looking at, because none of these neighborhoods are the same size.
Yeah.
And so when you look at that, you're getting the percentages of what the neighborhoods have.
They do have a little bit of insight into Glen Murray, because one of our staff works there, and she did a lot of outreach with it. Climbing with it.
Yeah, so just a reminder on, Sunset, right vertically between what's
Yeah,
on and Sunbury, you're the day, guys, I would tell you, I don't like, but, there are other outreach methods that we use. You know, whether it's in coasters, the posters, or in parks, or in, I think of that too, is there things in that area that maybe some of that kind of. But what I love about this conversation, I can tell everyone's interested, what are the neighborhoods, what are our people that were represented? And I think this is a awesome discussion, well, slide deck be available to the, right after tonight, because there's gonna be a lot of data that JR's, I think, leading the next several slides, and it's definitely wanna have. And I also wanna let you know, we'll be sending this, so all the fine numbers that we're reviewing tonight, I know it's still a little hard to see, you'll have those in hand.
Yeah.
Henry? You had something. Yeah, twice, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I wanted to double down on what Madison said about the daytime population to explain some of the, I don't live in Lake Oswego. I'm also the person that has processed the print surveys that we received. And I'll put on there too, people would say, I don't feel like my neighborhood's represented. They identified with a different, and I'm not from Lake Oswego, so don't ask me what it was, but a different neighborhood than those that we listed. So I think, because quite a few city employees who work here, self-included, don't live here, but we utilize the library. So if you have that daytime population, finds this convenient, but maybe it's not live.
I'm just gonna share a perspective because I have it. I'm part of the food pantry here in Lake Oswego, so Hunger Fighters. SNAP benefits were decreased significantly starting March 1st. And so all food pantries in the area have been experiencing a lot of lines and waits, and our numbers went up 40% in the month of March. And our guest numbers. And so when people come in and we ask them, right, because we don't have any limits to who can come to our food pantry, they say, well, your wait is 20 to 30 minutes, and the wait at the food pantry in my neighborhood is 2 hours. So just as the library is a convenient resource, right, for people access, in the same way people are accessing other resources that might be more convenient for them. And then they might stop by the library, right, because of all the options that are here in our community. So it's just a thought, and I know we had flyers and coasters and remarks and everything at the food pantry, so. Thank you again. I know that people might have been, waiting in line and doing the surveys. So it's just the daytime population or different circumstances that we kind of don't even think about might bring people to our community. So, I mean, really, when we were getting a lot of our survey responses, people are referencing Tiger to Tualatin and Hillsborough. People from Lake Oswego are driving an hour to go out to Hillsborough for a library when that's not convenient. And I think we also get that experience. People come to the farmer's market or our car and boat shows or in parade who don't live necessarily in Lake Oswego, but we have these wonderful amenities that people are also tapping into.
Thank you. Yeah. I agree, and you don't have to live in Lake Oswego to utilize the library and to take the survey. And although it seems like a high number, keep in mind that you had I think by the time I pulled this data, there was about a little less than 2,000 people had answered this question. So you're talking about 178, 2,000 people who said, I don't live in Lake Oswego. So it's still vastly overwhelmingly a response rate of residents. So keep that in mind as well. I'm gonna move us along so we have enough time to review the other things, but I think it's a good conversation and it's certainly something we can explore more as we continue to analyze this data. So this is a new one. I added the age demographic so you can see the breakdown of who's responding. And so you have 623 people in the 65 to 74 range. Those are your power users when it comes to responding to government surveys. Then you have your 70, which is over 400. And you have good representation. I mean, you're going to drop off when you get to the younger residents. And so that's why it's good that we were able to have a focus group of fifth graders. And we continue to try to populations. So what do you like about the library? You know, again, they like the materials, they like the selection, friendly staff. They feel welcome, comfortable spaces, and proximity for your big answers.
And if you can't see that line, because I almost can't, that the largest number there on the bottom is 2,000. You're looking at these graphs to kind of put it in, it goes from 0 to 2,000 left to right. So the highest number being 1,814 on top.
What's the number next to the circle?
4,000.
Oh, yeah, sorry. It is close to my home, it is 1,304, that's right.
Wonder more people. So when you learn about the books and the materials, 2,200 people selecting that one. Digital resources available online, 1,600 people. Special collection for 100. Public Wi-Fi, children's special events and programs, special meetings for all around 1,000. Do you want to future? And even today in the focus groups, I think it's for a cafe. This is coming up abundantly.
There, an interesting thing that I'm looking at right now, we can laugh about cafe space, but interesting how many times it was mentioned, but if you look at, I think the top half of all the draft numbers, all of it relates to space except for hours, which does relate to more access. So half of the top section is all about space in some way, shape, or form.
The control collections are really not accessing and not at this rates. Yeah. Barriers to library service, lack of personal time. And, location and hours. And you have chunks of your city that are 25-minute drive from the library. And when you think about the time commitment that means to go there, God forbid you get something, or you get there and they didn't have it and have to put it on hold or reserve it for you. It is a big time commitment that's cutting away from community factor. And then right under it, of course, is driving more distance. Awareness, again, don't get a complex. That's a big one. The third one. Then we get a bit of praise. So any questions or thoughts about the survey data? And again, this isn't a comprehensive examination of every survey question. There's not enough time to do it, and the survey is still alive until next week. But we will give you, once it's available, we will give you the raw, data from the survey and let you take a look at everything. Yeah.
Survey offered in multiple languages.
Yes. The survey was available online. You could use the Google Translate function to translate it. We also had the survey professionally translated into 4 other languages. Yeah.
Spanish, Korean, and Simplified training.
And Vietnamese. No, it's Korean. Yeah. So it's available in 4 languages: English, Spanish, Simplified Chinese, and Korean. And those were available. The hand surveys, written out surveys were available.
It's interesting to me that on quite a few of the other sites from the interviews and the focus groups, the wellcomeness theme came up, it seemed like quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it's very, very small and low on this list, so it's, I don't know. This
Yeah.
strikes me as interesting.
Yeah, you want to talk about that?
Well,
Yeah.
Just that, I mean, the thing that comes, pardon me, It comes to mind is that I surmise that a lot of the people who answered the survey are library users. Whereas with the in-depth interviews that we did, some people, and the focus, for instance, in the community forums, not necessarily. In fact, because we have striven to find what we are calling, you know, the not yet library users, or the hard to reach. You know, that's where you hear people saying, and here, we have heard this, is I don't feel welcome, because welcome doesn't mean somebody grimaces, you know, and tells you to go away or vanishes to the basement or whatever. It's that sense that you just pick up on it because of the history in part, but also because of people's daily experiences. That they don't feel welcome, and it isn't always by library staff. It's by other people using the library, you know, which is in part a function of space, as I mentioned, but it's not all that. And so I think the library strives and really tries to change that perception. But we have heard that even in this room from some of you, that is perception that you yourselves feel, or that you know people will feel that way. And it certainly has come up amongst the key informants, and the key informants that we've spoken with are people who know the city in one form or another, because they work in the city, or they are an ADA representative, or they're, you know, and so they have access to these harder to reach populations that are often difficult to get to, and to have an in-depth survey or a question, you know, interview. Not that we haven't, we have had some of those, but those are our channels. And we are hearing this, you know, it is about being seen. It's not just about this, it's about this, you know, and that's the best way I can express it. But it's profoundly there.
That's really helpful to know how to think about kind of the different input channels, and also that it seems like they're really effectively reaching that library users, the aspirational group of people who don't already tap in and what they
Trying, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. I think it's a challenge for all processes, you know, to reach out to people who aren't already engaged. So we're definitely making a lot of efforts. Just looking at my team here, we have done a lot. We've been out to like every park, putting signs and taking coasters to businesses, and just thinking about all the different groups in our community that might not yet interact with the library, or underserved, but that have really important information to share, really important perspectives that we need to hear to be able to serve everybody in the library future, and make sure that everybody does feel welcoming. So, well done.
Yes, and how to reach,
But it's challenging.
yes, we were, you know, recently paying attention to the Publishers Weekly program that you have, their 21-minute video, and about the millennials and Gen Xers, you know, who are readers and who are finding things, but not through the library. You know, they're finding it through social media, and it's not because their whole discovery methodology is different. It isn't, let's go search the card catalog, let's go online and search, no, it isn't that. It's that somebody mentioned something in a text message or on this feed or whatever. And that isn't that they aren't readers, but they don't feel connection to the library. So there were lots of very useful suggestions in that video about how, you know, how to market to that group that I know the library does some of it and would embrace. So some of this is about knowing how to reach markets that are not the traditional ways that we have, or even, so we're sometimes just kind of grasping and talk about how is the best way to go about this. But we have data that can help us with that. And I know the library's very don't want to do that. They're advocates, and the library is seen as an advocacy champion in the community. And so that, I mean, that's a big, huge plus for everybody, for the community, for the library, and for people.
Yeah, it's well said. It is well said, and I think like I can't agree more with what you're saying in terms of how we've reached out to the different populations and been able to actually get that input and the amount of effort that's been put on from staff to make sure they are reaching those neighborhoods. A couple of other things to consider when you're looking at this is a survey where people are being on a box that says, I don't feel well. And what we're looking at when we're looking at the qualitative data we've been collecting are statements that don't necessarily say, I don't feel well, right? They're different statements that we are receiving that's the theme of not feeling welcome. And so it's a way that we, because people are actually able to sit there and describe to us what it is they're thinking and talk to us about what it is they're thinking, or when they're talking about what a barrier is to the library. That's how we're able to actually capture that I don't feel aspect. The other thing that I think is very interesting is we just had this conversation as a consultant team on Tuesday. Our DEI expert, Christine Moses, really spoke to the power of qualitative data that collecting through the interviews and the focus groups. And she spoke to how powerful it is when you're having population that's telling you, I don't feel well, and what that speaks to, and how powerful that is when you're comparing it. There's just a lot of power behind that statement, what it speaks to and what it means for what you're trying to value as a community. And so, and what she cautioned us was to not overly rely on quantitative data, because there is a lot of power behind the story, especially if you're trying to make sure you're being inclusive of everyone. Yeah. I mean, she words it 1,000,000 times better, but that was the gist of it.
But I think the thing she did say, that was really helpful for everybody, was when you look at things through an equity lens, welcoming, she didn't say this part, but I, interpolate that welcoming and feeling welcoming, when you listen to the kids talk about what they like about coming into the library, but also what they want. Well, if what they want is way on the other side of town, they probably don't feel included. Right? So it's welcoming, inclusiveness, feeling like there is something for you in this community that's for you too, that it includes you. And I think that we have talked about this a lot, and that the absence of a physical space, and we're about to get into this, but you have said, and we have heard, accessibility is an issue. Accessibility in so many forms. That people want physical, they want space. And, a virtual library sphere isn't enough. People really want connection. So I think those are the three main things that really have kind of run under like a river, the recommendations, the preliminary recommendations, that the conclusions we came to, and preliminary recommendations that we have for you. But that's later, and really what we had hoped that, thank you, JR, that this presentation and information and the conversation about it would help you take the developing vision framework and answer a few questions for us, which we're going to do in groups and then kind of report out. But it's basically to help you say, well, have we gotten it right so far to interpret what we've heard? And did we miss something? And if we did, what is that? And what did you learn? Does this information that we've been imparting, does it say something that you want to make sure is in that in the vision statement that maybe is understated or not stated, or so that there's a chance for you to let this influence what you want to do with there. And against that backdrop, or I should say as a backdrop against that, we've also included, again, the city's 2023 preferred future and their goal. And we just wanted to make sure that we cross-check that there's alignment and that if there isn't, that it's talk about that, why there isn't, or if there's something that this group feels strongly about that needs to be stated in your vision framework that may or may not appear, so there's no mystery or anything. We just want to cross that, check off their comments that we haven't left that out of our thinking. And then the last thing we would like, you to do in the group session is to tell us if you think there ought to be something else that we've left a little parking on. What else should we be thinking about? We've talked in the past about collections and looking at the future direction of collections, sort of like we did with the facilities. And it isn't that we're going to do that necessarily between now and when we come back, but we at least want a list. What is it that we haven't said that needs to be said? That can be folded into the vision framework. But what other issues, concerns, if any, do you want to make sure don't fall off the radar? And so we've allowed a placeholder for that today.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's great. How are we doing on time?
Good.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're right, early on break.
Why don't we go ahead and take a break and when we come back, we're diving into the framework.
It was one back at 6:30, 25.
25, okay, you guys?
Okay, 6:25, thank you.
Well, I really want to get into this vision framework. You know how it's developed, how it's evolved. It started here in our first session with your brainstorming. We added data and we had some more work at the last section. And what we did, the project team, was to take what we thought we heard from you and craft it into a framework that includes basically values type statements. We have a kind of a placeholder at the top. Haven't filled out yet, but we think we'll be able to do that after we do it together now. And so I'm going to go ahead with this. Remember, I mentioned that the city council preferred future. And it isn't written out this way. You have a copy probably in front of you if you want to take a quick look. But what I did was break out the preferred future statement. I broke out bullets so that you could more easily see it without having to read dense text. And so just one thing to keep in mind. And then these are the goal that's all under for now. And the one that's almost smack in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet. Lead the community visioning process with the Lake Oswego Public Library. Implement a strategic plan based on the recommendations of the visioning process. The reason this is particularly important to the project team and to the consulting team especially was we had to ask ourselves when we start thinking about our recommendations, strategic recommendations as a consultant team, what does it need to support for the city council? And that's where we kind of landed is, this is a overarching vision. It's abstract in many ways, even with all of its bullets. And that's what it should be, because from this and from your recommendations and from our recommendations, we haven't necessarily put together. We'll see what your recommendations are, but we went ahead and with this in mind, feeling our obligation to the city in terms of our deliverables, is that was our frame of reference when we got to our strategic recommendations. We don't want to impose them on you. We just have come to the conclusion, this is what we need to do, and what we need to say about what you need to do next, if the next thing is to do a strategic plan. And that obviously is what the city has in mind. And the vision statement, as you know, is the first thing in a strategic plan, but it's not the whole strategic plan. So we're at the beginning of that, and it's very important because it sort of sets the tone, right? So, okay to move on? Melissa, would you like to speak to this? Yes.
We have a staff working group of library staff that have been meeting after each task force meeting, and I'm hoping to process some of the information, not only from the findings, but from your work as well. And so the team met and reviewed the vision framework before it came before you all. And overall, the team was just really, they felt really proud of the value statements that this group had helped to shape, and really resonated with those. So I'm not sure if you're all looking at the document as we speak, but some of those value statements really resonated with us. Overall, the staff working group was very much on board with the direction of the vision framework. But a few of the conversation points that we had that we wanted to share with you all for your consideration, the thing that we talked about was the value of educational play, early literacy, and just the importance of the important role the library plays in connecting children and caregivers and providing that support system was just one thing we talked about that for you all to consider potentially including in the document. Another area was around intellectual freedom. So that we were looking for something that appears to be missing here that is really an important value for us. Of course, this vision statement is not just about the library staff, it really is community vision statement. So we're not trying to say you need to put this in, but just letting you know that these were areas that we discussed and that you might want to talk a little bit more about. Another suggestion was there's this the phrase in the vision framework right now that says ever changing, ever expanding world, and staff thought but maybe we want to expand upon that a bit. And these were some of the specifics that we would suggest including, but we weren't sure if that was really representative of what this group would say. So just wanted to share a little bit with you about how we processed that work and some of the conversations that we had. I want to add.
And, and you have talked about these wonderful spaces. We talked about education and multi-generational, crossover. And so it seemed implied that the library for children, youth, and families is all part of what we've been hearing from you. But what the staff obviously felt wasn't as emphasized as they might have expected. We're not asking you to change it. We're asking you to consider their observation and decide when you look at it, if you want to strengthen it in any way, or you're happy with it, or maybe you didn't, rewrote it, so you might not like it. So anyway, that just wanted to throw that out there. Right? Likewise, on the intellectual freedom, these core American Library Association value statements and documents like around privacy, intellectual freedom, book banning, that type of thing. You do have two more principles, I would call ALA principles, in your document that you stated. One had to do with the library as the cornerstone of a democracy, which is pretty, you might feel that covers it. And also on free public library. Those were two themes that came right out of this group. So what I see And again, we're saying, don't, you don't have to include those. We just wanted to bring forth staff input out there. What I often see is these values will be expressed in the strategic plan somewhere. They're institutional values that staff put forward and that are ultimately blessed by by the local government, in the strategic plan. So that's just background. And then I don't think I can add anything at all about the ever-changing, ever-expanding world, except that, as Melissa said, staff wondered if annotating that somewhere with a few adjectives might improve. Okay, any questions about that? Good. Okay. So, what we would like to do is ask you to break into 3 groups. Melissa and JR and Jason and I are going to facilitate this group. And what we're going to ask essentially these questions. 1, does the draft vision framework reflect the essence of the task force work thus far? So do you look at it and go, oh yeah, it's us, that's what we said. Yeah. Or are there concepts that should be added, changed, or modified? Okay. And do the concepts reflect now the community in this part? You've heard community input, but you've heard some more today. And as far as you understand that community input. 4th, is there alignment with the 2023 council preferred future? And 5, are there suggestions, ideas, recommendations, or next steps that you think should be added? Okay, based on your thinking now. Each group would do that. We're going to spend, maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes doing that, and then report out. We're going to be doing our very best, the facilitators, to facilitate and record. So that we have those notes to take away with us and to then incorporate in the next iteration. And then we will have one final question for you that was going to be a surprise question, but I'm going to tell you now so you can please be thinking about it while you're doing all the other thinking. Okay, and that is, what should be in the preamble? Right now, we just have a blank there because we want to do this groundwork, and then that would clearly surface what be there. Think of it as the city council's preferred future. It's that stage. So it is going to include the things that it's your little executive summary. That which you want right up front that encompasses the vision that you see. For okay. Ready to go. We'll have group. Oh yeah, group 1, 2, and 3. And let's see. How many people? So I guess we have groups of 4.
Yeah, why don't we count on 1, 2, 3, 4?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, 1,
2, 3.
1, 3.
4,
1, 2.
3.
Yes, question first. Yes, what's that? The question is the list of values the step ranking? It's not. It's just. Well, I really want to get into this vision framework. You know how it's developed, how it's evolved. It started here in our first session with your brainstorming. We added data and we had some more work at the last section. And what we did, the project team, was to take what we thought we heard from you and craft it into the framework. That includes basically values type statements. We have a kind of a placeholder at the top. Haven't filled out yet, but we think we'll be able to do that after we do together now. And, so, I'm gonna go ahead with this. Remember I mentioned that the city council preferred future. And it isn't written out this way. You have a copy probably in front of you if you want to take a quick look. But what I did was break out the preferred future statement. I broke out bullets so that you could more easily see it without having to read dense text. And so just one thing to keep in mind. And then these are the goal that's all under for now. And the one that's almost smack in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet. Lead the community visioning process for the Lake Oswego Public Library. Implement a strategic plan based on the recommendations of the visioning process. The reason this is particularly important to the project team and to the consulting team especially was we had to ask ourselves when we start thinking about our recommendations, strategic recommendations as a consultant team, you know, what does it need to support for the city council? And that's where we kind of landed is, you know, this is a overarching vision. It's abstract in many ways, even with all of its bullets. And that's what it should be, because from this and from your recommendations and from our recommendations, which we haven't necessarily put together, we'll see what your recommendations are. But we went ahead and with this in mind, feeling our obligation to the city in terms of our deliverables is that was our frame of reference when we got to our strategic recommendations. We don't want to impose them on you. We just have come to the conclusion, this is what we need to do, and what we need to say about what you need to do next, if the next thing is to do a strategic plan. And that obviously is what the city has in mind. And the vision statement, as you know, is the first thing in a strategic plan, but it's not the whole strategic. So we're at the beginning of that, and it's very important because it sort of sets the tone, right? So, okay to move on. Melissa, would you like to speak to this?
Yes. Well, we have a staff working group of library staff that have been meeting after each task force meeting, and I'm hoping to process some of the information, not only from the findings, but from your work as well. And so the team met and reviewed the vision framework before it came before you all. And overall, the team was just really, they felt really proud of the value statements that this group had helped to shape and really resonated with those. So I'm not sure if you're all looking at the document as we speak, but some of those value statements really resonated with us. Overall, the staff working group was very much on board with the direction of the vision framework. But a few of the conversation points that we had that we wanted to share with you all for your consideration, the thing that we talked about was the value of educational play, early literacy, and just the importance of the important role the library plays in connecting children and caregivers and providing that support system was just one thing we talked about that for you all to consider potentially including in the document. Another area was around intellectual freedom. So that we were looking for something that appears to be missing here that is really an important value for us. Of course, this vision statement is not just about the library staff, it really is community vision statement. So we're not trying to say you need to put this in, but just letting you know that these were areas that we discussed and that you might want to talk a little bit more about. Another suggestion was there's this the phrase in the vision framework right now that says, ever-changing, ever-expanding world and staff thought, but maybe we want to expand upon that a bit. And these were some of the specifics that we would suggest including, but they weren't, we weren't sure if that was really representative of what this group would say. So just wanted to share a little bit with you about how we processed that work and some of the conversations that we had. I want to add.
And, you know, and you have talked about these wonderful spaces. We talked about education and multi-generational, you know, crossover. And so it's always, it seemed implied that the library for children, youth and family is all part of what we've been hearing from you. But what the staff obviously felt wasn't as emphasized as they might have expected. We're not asking you to change it. We're asking you to consider their observation and decide when you look at it, if you want to strengthen it in any way, or you're happy with it, or maybe you didn't, you know, rewrote it, so you might not like it. So anyway, that just wanted to throw that out there. And likewise, on the intellectual freedom, these core American Library Association value statements and documents like around privacy, intellectual freedom, book banning, that type of thing. You do have two more principles, I would call ALA principles, in your document that you stated. One had to do with, well, the library is the cornerstone of a democracy, which is pretty, you might feel that covers it. And also on free public library. Those were two themes that came right out of this group. So what I see, and again, we're saying you don't have to include those. We just wanted to bring forth staff input out there. What I often see is these values will be expressed in the strategic plan somewhere. They're institutional values that staff put forward and that are ultimately blessed by the local government in the strategic plan. So it's that's just background. And then I don't think I can add anything at all about the ever-changing, ever-expanding world, except that, as Melissa said, staff wondered if annotating that somewhere with a few adjectives might improve. Okay, any questions about that? Good. Okay. So, what we would like to do is ask you to break into 3 groups. Melissa and JR and Jason and I are going to facilitate this group. And what we're going to ask essentially these questions. 1, does the draft vision framework reflect the essence of the task force work thus far? So you look at it and go, oh yeah, it's us, that's what we said. Yeah. Or are there concepts that should be added, changed, or modified? Okay. And do the concepts reflect now the community in this part? You've heard community input, but you've heard some more today. And as far as you understand that community input. 4th, is there alignment with the 2023 Council Preferred Future? And 5, are there suggestions, ideas, recommendations, or next steps that you think should be added? Okay, based on your thinking now. Each group would do that. We're going to spend, maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes doing that, and then report out. We're going to be doing our very best, the facilitators, to facilitate and record, so that we have those notes to take away with us and to then incorporate in the next iteration. And then we will have one final question for you that was going to be a surprise question, but I'm going to tell you now so it can be. Please be thinking about it while you're, doing all the other thinking. Okay, and that is, what should be in the preamble? Right now, we just have a blank there. Because we wanted to do this groundwork, and then that would clearly surface what be there. Think of it as this, in the city council's preferred future. It's that stage. So it is gonna, it's gonna include the things that it's your little executive summary. You know, that which you want right up front that encompasses the vision that you see for. Sound okay? Ready to go, we'll have group, group 1, 2, and 3, and let's see, how many people? So I guess we have groups of 4.
Yeah, why don't we count on 1, 2, 3, 4?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, 1, 2,
3.
1, 3.
4,
1, 2.
3.
Yes, question first. Yes, what's that? The question is the list of values the step ranking? It's not. Not, it's just.
They really did a great job. A lot of it was, when we're reflecting on the information we were doing, I think one of the, couple things came out, there's not going to be consolidated. There's a fair amount of duplication of words and themes that the opportunity to consolidate some of the reporting would be helpful, easier to understand. Also, kind of the lettering, sequence of lettering, just gives a little perception that there might be higher priority than other areas, just by the number and the letters, which is really unintentional, but we read that. Pulling out space, and we do talk about space and facilities quite a bit, but being more explicit, being more specific and explicit about space. Talked about that. Talked about location specific, from the standpoint of Southwest location options, but then we started talking about, and that's over here. Seems that we identify potential partnerships for spaces as limited to government locations. And so, and maybe we're wrong there, but that was just our thought was that, why aren't we thinking about, private public partnerships? Or partnerships maybe with the medical community or something like that, because it's not like there's like tons of space laying around town to develop. So we wanted to be thoughtful about that. We also talked about the existing school libraries. And going back to the conversation earlier about where library staff are, limited hours, and you know, in one of the schools, we talked about how long is a library at the school open? It's about a half hour before school and a half hour after school. So what if libraries were involved? City library, you know, cross partnership with local schools to have opportunities to look there. So there was a lot talking about the space. That's the feedback, but I think we need to be more explicit in the use of space. So that's, I think, one of the key themes. Let me go back 1 second. Also shared in part of the partnerships, also funding came up. If we can explore shared funding models, if it's a lease of an existing facility or if a shared resource like we talked about schools helping with the funding to just be more open to ways of kind of getting to the goal. Oh, believe it or not, it seemed to be there was a little bit missing focus on collections. Even though collections was mentioned, it was mentioned that many times collection was brought up and how high it ranked in the spray and the focus group feedback. It just seemed like maybe think that somebody was almost assumed that collections was such a priority, but it almost got lost. Even though it's in there, that was one of the findings for this group. But be mindful of conflicting use and conflicting spaces. So we can't think same space unless it's flexible. Just being mindful of those impacts. Another thing. Technology was a pretty good discussion too, and the evolution of libraries in the next 10 years, meaning right now, libraries seem to be mostly a place of trust. Going to give, utilizing a librarian to give sort of the right answers, or we talked about the future possibly being more about library staff be more of almost like a navigator to get to those access to so many different resources that are out there. So actually, that one specific example came from a librarian. And I think, yeah, I think that generally covers the main concepts of this area, unless I missed something, guys.
I think one of the things that I really appreciate being brought up was that our library doesn't necessarily be in lieu of the school libraries, but it's in addition to the school libraries. So the function of the school libraries might be testing, right? And missing that social space, the connection space, because it's serving a different function than what we are hearing from what our feedback is. So I think that even changed my thinking of it. It's not in lieu of, in addition to, and not taking away from one or the other. Thank you for sparking off so much.
Over to go. Okay, so our, and so our had a lot of the same comments that basically brought up. I spent a lot of time working with different values and thinking of extra redundancy in there and that they could be combined. And then upon further discussion about what words should change and what specific values, which we reported, really it came down to the value statements are too long and there's too much qualification in each value statement, and it's that qualification that's creating a lot of redundancy. Because you're seeing certain things brought up again and again in qualifications of the value. And then the question is, should those things actually should those qualifications own values and so on and so on. And so basically the recommendation was to take those value statements and reduce them down to 5 or 6 word statements that really clearly said what this value statement is when looked at it. You could even bold it. And then making sure you're eliminating some of the redundancies that exist in the current value statement list. So that was really good feedback. There were comments put on specific words that thought they should be added or thought they should be excluded. And then talking about the differences between certain statements as well. So then on section 2, one term of the word residents, because of wanting to be more inclusive. Thinking that there needed to be emphasis put on air circulation or really more broadly health environments. And recommendations to eliminate specific words in this case in section D to remove the word abilities. And then in terms of recommendations, really the next step that was really included here from this group was to make a roadmap to make the vision a reality. And you can, maybe you could expand upon that somewhat to say, funding, how do you make it possible? And so we recorded all of it. We want to make sure that these edits, those recommended word choices are in. But overall, that's the direction we're going.
Thank you. Anything anyone wants to add in that group?
Yeah, I would just say one thing that, in terms of the values that popped out to us as needing a stronger emphasis was coming from the librarian, wonderful input, or library staff. Was the focus on early literacy, focus on children. So we have that on there too, but we do see that as a community value. Those of us with young kids were self-conscious that it was just us, but affirm that is something our whole community wants to build into. Awesome. Thank you.
And I think that another important point, I don't know if you said it is, what's the point as that we value exercise. I think it's important how you start by making that and so because in that way you make when you're reading it, you can feel that we're taking ownership as part of this. What that goal is.
Excellent. Anything else from that group?
So people were mentioning, like, oh, I read this, I could really hear about other people in the room and think that's the past meetings and, so I think overall felt that it was representative, the document was representative of the data. One comment was it's really important to keep the core of the library, central in that physical resources and the space for community and also technology and how important it is to provide access to all of our community members to those core services. The importance of the library and the community gathering space, particularly around the concept of intergenerationality and being a space where both age groups and interact and learn from each other. Things that we thought should be added. Autism and neurodivergent friendly and accessible space. The online experience matters too. We talked a lot about the journey that people have when you're in a library. When you start building, first and looking for an item, thinking, there's a lot of different questions on the journey to the library, which was about fun. We really want to think about the online experience as well as the physical experience and give and retain choices for people who want to connect virtually. That's definitely a need for a lot of people. And then just the idea of meeting people where certain experience. The things that we talked about adding, the idea of an uncurated experience that you can have when you come into the library. You don't have to like register necessarily to come in, or you can just come in and experience things, like explore things and try new things. And that's for all ages, but we felt like there are sometimes offers more opportunities for young people to have personal experience of trying things, and the library supports that for adults as well. Stood out. We talked as well about the importance of appealing to people at all stages of their life, whatever their needs are, whatever their learning areas are in different places in their life. Being able to meet those needs. And we also talked about capturing fun moments and ways that we can get people excited about what's going on at the library and just kind of get their interest piqued in different ways. So talk about like, what if there was a camera that like let people know what's going on in the library, privacy reasons, and how we're going to do that in an existing camera. And I think, for the end of the day, people excited. We talked about the ecosystem of the library. A little bit, that whole journey of experience. I'm sorry. And then for question number 3, do we feel like this is reflective of the community and what we would have? The library continues to listen, ask questions, and check in with the community as part of like an ongoing process. To be truly responsive and continue those relationships. And how we're, really building ambassadors and more advocates, in this group, and that will just continue to grow moving forward. And with more people being aware in the library. And then one area that we wanted to talk a little bit about competing priorities for resources, tools, and just thinking about that a little bit. And I'll turn it over to you, Rick, for that. And then we're gonna probe into that a little bit with this.
And we had to see if we didn't come up with places in a CAS. So I think it's okay, we'll have a placeholder gas draft. Or I think it's gonna be under the section that these are the other things we want to think about or talk about, or necessarily in the value statement. So,
Another thing that stood out in the city council values for future was around climate change, resiliency, and sustainability, and the library role in doing that. That is for the community, and how that's something that's currently really a focus that we could work on. And then for other things to think about, continuing to use social media and other ways to reach younger residents. Relationship with the local libraries in a larger ecosystem, and valuing what they provide that might always be unique. You might have But then also thinking, where's our degree of fit into that larger ecosystem? What are the unique values and services that we, our community and are needed here? Then we talk also about the library's virtual presence of being connected the system. We went a little bit into the preferred future and kind of what that preamble vision should include. Top of the list was space for people and their divergent interests, for them all exist and thrive. Accessibility and proximity to the community, rather than welcoming for all, place to congregate, meet up, unwind, escape from social stressors, kind of like that. Embracing clear space for the community, and again, for a mix of different age groups, and how the intergenerational interactions with the library to support that, and that feeling of escape from social stressors, because you can get into that larger community space and connect with different types of people. And we just kind of ended with the games. For things that you can discover through whatever that journey may be in the library.
Well, good job. From that, remember anything else?
I'm not, as I'm listening, there's something that came up in ours that Lynn brought up, and I feel like it needs to be voiced when it's missing is the people. So we spent time talking about, we brought it up, right, the staff, how important library staff is to the experience. We talked about how school staff is getting cut and inexperienced, people are curating, and I feel like now that with the information, if we don't put, we value like well-trained, sort of whatever, if we don't put that in our values, then we're gonna have this amazing library in this wonderful community. And it's not gonna serve the purpose that we set out to serve, because we never said that we value really well-trained and important people to run people. So I feel like that might be a core value to have to add. Right, I mean, that's why this is working, because all these wonderful people are.
We sort of talked about what the role of the librarian will be in the future and how important that will be. Have that staff still be professional, a part of what was going on. So I think you'll find it.
Great. And yes, that sticks out to me that we've identified this missing in terms of emphasis of people who are amazing librarians. The collections is perhaps under indexed and calling out what's going really well and continuing to invest in.
So this group started their preferred. The things they'd like to see in the executive summary, it might be 2 or 3 sentences or 4, whatever, sort of. What are, looking at their list, is there anything you would star on their list? Is there anything that you would add that you think needs to be?
Because that 4th page.
Yes, let me get that. Can everybody see this? No. It looks like it's ready to go to sleep. Okay, space, not necessarily said this way, but these are the things you want to emphasize. Space for people, urban and interests. And exist and thrive. That's accessibility, proximity.
One thing that we brought up was that accessibility, when I hear it, I think about physical accessibility, being able to get in and out, use the parts of it, but we've also expanded that to hours. The time that is available, that accessibility has to look beyond the physical effort to get in and out of it, or the transportation that gets you there or back.
And specifically Drishti was doing some excellent work around where can teens go to have that space where they can run around, you know, and because right now you were noting, but if you want to jump in and see me, but that the library is open basically school hours, so they don't have that option to go do that.
Very good, thank you for bringing that up. So they were kind of a full blown, somehow we need to get into that preamble, really accessibility is sort of in all its forms. We need to, and, yeah. Awesome. I'm getting the idea about what we might need to say then.
And I think that's where we were struggling, accessibility, we don't want it to make it so big that it doesn't, you know, we're just saying accessibility, but there's all these components of the virtual accessibility, the hours and space accessibility, the, you know, ADA accessibility, or what we're saying, transportation, yeah. But if you go too broad, and I think that's what we were struggling with, if you say just accessibility, we want to actually call out what those specific things are as a promise of fulfillment. We will make this space accessible.
Okay, good.
So I think it would be good to include financial accessibility. That's what we're gonna.
Financials,
Yeah.
adding that to our, okay.
I think it's a great point is when you make it like accessibility, you can use so many things, so naming them specifically gives it.
So one thing that Donna was talking about is because she is a former council member. And I'm thinking about, well, when the library improvement bond failed in 2012, you know, what's the thing that's gonna get people excited about, you know, a library? And we're talking about how there's a new pool and whole recreational center kind of being built over on the bay. And if we could have electronic vehicles, buses that come and transport people, that would make it accessible to teens, that would go along with the core value of the city about climate change. So maybe something along, that's also a piece of accessibility.
Absolutely. It's just a big accessibility universe.
Well, the scarcity of resources, both the land and the financial tax base kind of scarcity means that these different functions have to come together. Parks and Recreation has to work with the school district and the library, and they all have to kind of function together, figure out how to use these resources in their best places.
Partnering and collaboration sounds like what you're saying.
And I think this group here has made a comment, I think it's relevant to this discussion, was in valuing all types of thinking and this concept of inclusion. It's not just inclusion, like it's not inclusive if you can't access it. And that was kind of the point they were making. You can't have a conversation about inclusion at your facility if you don't have access to that. So.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we may not be fully done with that, but I think we have enough that given the time we have left, the next more important thing to do is to look at our, Barry Dunn's preliminary recommendation.
The section 3. Sorry, is that section 3?
No, you'll haven't seen it, it's up here.
It's great. Just done there.
So, first we talked about findings, so our conclusions and findings from this process so far and how we're interpreting things. So number one, the library is highly regarded as community. Everyone we've talked to seems to really appreciate the community, even a library, even those we haven't talked to but have surveyed, appreciate it. Or appreciate the library. Achieving universal accessibility is clear to imperative in the sure very population. And again, this is all the things we've talked about with accessibility. The library vision framework pictures the library as a primary catalyst for achieving community or deepening. The community connector, community builder, a champion for inclusion and equity, harm, peaceful, and lifelong learning. Number 4, expanding the scope of the credit for location of document website represents is crucial to achieving the burden. And then finally, the library facility, the current library facility needs renovations, remodeling, reordering, to act on this system. Then, we've had a lot of conversations about this, but before I move on, do you all agree with those findings, or do those yeah? That's good, then we don't have a problem.
Would it also include either a building on the west side or satellite locations scattered throughout? So we don't necessarily have to have two big libraries, but maybe it could be one big library and lots of satellites that are accessible to local communities who use.
I agree with you, and I think we're gonna talk about that in our next section, we have similar thoughts. So these are preliminary strategy recommendations moving forward. These are preliminary. Strategic recommendations.
Did you say these were preliminary?
Right here watching.
These are staff, Liz, Bruce the consultant.
What I'm saying is if you launch people to the moon with these preliminary recommendations, they name this. They are going to be, based upon what we're hearing from the community, what we're corroborating with you all, and then the recommendations and the findings that you all have, seems to be pointing towards development of really two models here, and what we call an optimum model and an approved model. And that's really developing framework, roadmap for these two different types of models. They need to be guided by the vision framework. They provide the basic aims and levels of community support. They have to include capital and operating process in a rough order of magnitude at least. And probably need to contain some form of architectural renderings. This is what we're recommending for next step. So this is what we call the optimal model. 7 million, you have a public library, another public library on the west side of town. Renovate the existing one. And then you also have a strategically located service outposts. Mobile services allow for shared presence in a modern living matter of space. And so the next step we would recommend preliminarily taken here is to, first of all, you need to describe the model and you need to estimate the cost of the model. You have to have someone develop what the details behind what this model is. You have to continue to have public engagement for 2 reasons. One, you have to see if the community supports the model, and you also need the community to then become an advocate for the model. So it's really 2 things you accomplish. You then have to work within the city to determine potential funds. And there's a whole, array of funding options. What's been looking at. Finally, you have the full resident engaged support the actual model. What are the voters willing to do? That's sort of your first step to that. That's the optimal model. Really premised around you have to modernize the current library and you have to build some sort of library on the west side of town, full service library. The improved structural model is essentially renovating the existing facility, and then you create outpost library services on the west side of town, short of actually developing a full-blown, full-service library. You have to add modern amenities, you have to add meeting gathering spaces, creative spaces, study rooms, you have to improve parking. Cycling, retrofit, staring, and then you have to develop some system to get more mobile services and other satellite operations delivered to the other parts of the city. And it's the exact same steps to achieve that. You have to design it, you have to come up with preliminary cost estimates. You have to engage the public on that design and on those cost estimates. Both seeing if they support it, as well as having them advocate for it. You have to work with the city to develop funding options for what the community will support, at least in your preliminary discussions. And then you have to go full-blown polling to figure out if residents will support. Regardless of which model is chosen, these two broad statements hold. The current facility should have a full architectural assessment with designs for modernizing and adding amenities according to the chosen service model. Going forward, you have to continue to hold a high standard of service and assume essentially a proactive the values and the roles of the vision framework. The vision framework that has been developed by this process over these last few months with your all's input and all of the community's input is what makes this valid. No one can say that there was not a community effort that didn't point. There was not a community effort that didn't point to this being needed, right? This community effort is what's pointing to this being needed. You know, we didn't come in here with a prescribed notion of what we wanted to add or do. I had never even heard of Lake Oswego until I read this. But so I had. So good. The point being, we didn't come here with any preconceived notions. There was no table set for us. We came in here and are objectively looking at the system and objectively interviewing everyone in this community and conducting a survey. And anyone who comes in here and looks at the data that we see is objectively going to say, you're not, you need a bit of a different service model to be a modern library serving all of this community. And that's why we've made the recommendations we've made. And I think that's also why they coincide with the recommendations that you all are considering. Melissa, Ruth, Jason, is there anything you all want to add?
I think you said it really well, and just a reminder, I think, you know, based on what folks talked about before the last planning process and the input that was received, and, you know, it was very clear to us coming in, guys, this isn't about just the facility. This may not be facility. This is about the future service delivery, the model of the library. So we were, that sort of elephant in the room feel was brought up to us as a consultant team. And by the way, we do that anyway. You know, we take a step back and say, where's the service model? And that's how we got to where we are. And again, these are draft, and we do want your feedback, but these are the things that we've heard and taken away so far.
And, you know, part of our thinking is, I think I speak for our whole team, the consultant team, when I say that we recommend the optimal model. Because it's so clear what we're asking for. And so I think that's what we need to present that. The next thing is that people are gonna wanna know, well, what is that? Break it down, describe it for me. We've got these abstractions. But I think what we're looking at an optimum model has two library physical facilities that are very much designed for people and collections and everything, but for people, because this is what we're hearing loud and clear. And these other outlets and a very robust virtual infrastructure, technology infrastructure, IT infrastructure into the future, because we know it's going to all keep changing. So it is, as Madison called it, it's an ecosystem. And what we've steered away from doing ourselves is we don't think that another library facility would be called a branch, or that would be built and the existing facility would be called a branch. it's a system that we're talking about here for a service area that has many components, including outposts or whatever you want to end up calling those, that could be in partnership with all of these pieces that we talked about, that could make access to the library, some of it active, some of it passive, but it's a whole, you know, the whole structure, it's a whole idea. And the reason to go to an, you know, the other model is that by doing that description, and we know enough about what, from what we've heard and what the community has said, and what we know as professional librarians in this field, about how we could map out, without going down to the detail of it's gonna have this many linear feet of shelving, this many seats, reader seats and all that. We're not going to, we don't recommend going to that. What we recommend is doing the next level down that makes it a narrative, a descriptive enough that, you know, people could look at a rendering that an architect does of the existing library redone and the other library fleshed out. Even if we don't have a piece of property, it's sort of not important to get the range of costs. Now you have a range. And, you know, one may look like totally picture, looks like look at a picture, but that is something that has to happen in order for the city council to make a wise decision about what to do next. And that's where they can begin to get into their strategic planning. They've got this vision, they've got an idea of what the potential costs are, they can decide, do we need to poll the community? Probably, you know, but that engagement process has to keep going on, and, you know, to do anything less of either of those models just isn't gonna, you know, it doesn't make any sense to keep going with the existing facility and to try to provide the operational cost to manufacture the kind of a system that Optimum would give you. So it may cost you a lot of money to build out, but if you are trying to do an operation to serve everybody, the way this vision statement, it's virtually impossible to do. It's not really, so anyway, just a kind of a background, as far as next steps and what seems practical for, to help the city think about it and go to the next step.
It all sounds practical and a no-brainer to me. Have to ask the question, in all of the feedback that you got, I haven't heard any negatives or downsides or reasons not to pursue the library. Did you get any responses that would say a library is not the value, or why it wouldn't be, why wouldn't it be a value at this time?
I think you talked about responses that can represent, we looked at a lot of the data and the feedback. Here's some examples. There's a fear of a threat. Oh my God, I love the current library. It's in my neighborhood, or I love the location. It's where I go to get X, Y, and Z. Please don't touch it. Keep it as it is. That's one. Another one is funding priorities. There's so many priorities in our town. How can this be a top priority? Another one is space. Where can you build a latest figure? I mean, where? And so how, you know, why would we prioritize this? I think it's another one. There's always the, did you reach out to many people? Yeah, and that, by the way, we're in communities, we just had an engagement of 30,000. It's in a community of 90,000. It's some people are still saying, was that enough? Yeah, there's that.
And you know, you're talking a lot about what the people aren't able to reach far enough to say the possibilities are there. It's just you have to have the mindset. But I mean, is there any undercurrent of attitude where libraries are irrelevant? I mean, what is the percentage that you're talking about? Because that's the part when you take it for funding, that's going to be the hurdle.
Yeah, so there was that too, and there was Woodlands Library. I mean, there's those figures, and we have gone libraries type statements.
50% use says that it's possible that there's 50% out there that have that attitude.
So that's a taste of some of what would be on the other side and not really understanding maybe, or extreme with what is the service delivery model of the library. And what we're saying is that the future library service delivery model should change based on the majority of the feedback we received. You asked about there, you know, you guys read this feedback extensively. Did I miss anything as far as examples of?
Well, yeah, you have people who say, I like the current facility. Do we need a new one? I think really, a lot of the negative comments we received in mass that weren't what I would almost consider one-off kind of comments were based around fear of losing the current location. That's what a lot of the resistance to a new library was predicated on. We don't want to lose the current one, which is why, and it influenced the recommendations you see here, because neither of our recommendations say replace the current facility. Because that's not what the community, what from our conversations, what the community would support. It really is, you have people who love the current location, who love the current library, who don't want it to move. And frankly, given the geography layout of the city, I don't think we can have a one library system that really serves this whole. You really do need to with the ancillary services.
Well, the beauty of it is without, I mean, we didn't only recommend that the library, the current library be part of the model because you want it, but because it makes sense. It's already there. It's built. It needs to be fixed for somebody, whoever's going to inhabit it. Of course, it could be the library. I mean, it's perfect. Maybe not perfect, but you know, I mean, there's no reason it can't be part of that model, and that the people who love that library can continue to have it. And it isn't that nothing will change, because it can't be that nothing changes. The building is 40 years old. It needs to change. And what we're hearing, if you have another facility that's adequate in size, then you can remodel that existing facility, updating a system. You can remodel it to be the people space too, because now you have locations for your collections. You know, this library could be, the existing library can be really well remodeled for great space, people space, and have a popular collection, because it's not going to be hard to get anything in the system or out of the system. So there are all those possibilities, but I have heard those things too. So then fear about they're going to take the library away, but I do think that, you know, we live in a society where technology is practically worshipped, and that, you know, the more you can automate things and use AI and, you know, the better. Well, if we listen to what people are saying in this community, that isn't what we want. You know, and I think, you know, the 50% of the population that uses the library probably could be a much larger number if it were more accessible to people. So I think my experience is with many of these projects, all of these projects over time, that you have to fight for it. You know that. You have to fight for those things that you hold dear. And there's a large part of this community believes that the library is that thing, that entity which is about community cohesion and resilience. That's a very powerful message in a time when there aren't a lot of, you know, people need that. And that isn't going to go away. It's going to get more so. So anyway.
Can I ask one quick question about all of this? I think the recommendation is wonderful, love it. And I especially liked the part about bringing visual assets of the models themselves, whether it's, you know, perfect, just a starting spot to respond to, because we know seeing is believing. A bunch of words on paper doesn't really spark very much enthusiasm in a lot of people. The models would go a long way for the architectural renderings. Is that for June? Like that seems, okay, but that seems like aggressive and also like when does that happen? Who pays for it? This is probably too in the weeds, but I'm just curious, like, is there buy off or is that part of what you bring to the council to ask them to receive it?
We'll definitely be presenting some, some version of these recommendations to council. We have a preliminary presentation to them May 2nd, and then we'll do a final presentation in probably late June, potentially early July, depending on their schedule. Once we have the full data set, and then they'll be giving us some direction, hopefully supporting moving forward and developing those concepts and cost estimates. So that work would likely take place like summer and fall of this year. And then, Madison and I have talked about polling and when to time that. It would likely be in the spring of 24. That we might have those concepts and cost estimates and renderings ready to do some polling. Cool.
And it'd be a new project. That's basically the next project you would get for this current mission.
It's like, do we have but
Yeah, the task force signed up for the next 2 years. But perhaps anyway, we'll see again next year.
donations after all the way up to the architecture.
For 5 years, the budget cycle is still underway. It's not yet finalized, but we have allocated some funding for polling, potentially additional consultants for our rendering if needed, depending on what the council direction is. We have budgeted for that in the library budget pending the approval.
I think the idea here is to get the understanding through engagement, what is the updated vision? Before we go to maybe design and bricks and mortar and that sort of thing. And just knowing that what we were asked to do as consultant people is just that. Let's update the vision. There's things that have changed. Let's get more people involved. And this is really what you guys are doing. We appreciate that. There are other steps though, as you outlined. This task force still has an opportunity. And, I know that the date might not work for everyone and it's a full, I don't know what the date set, but there will be more discussions to include finalizing the framework we went through. We have some additional community feedback that we're still having to include and implement. So those are additional steps. So, we don't go from here to necessarily that, but meaning another step beyond that necessarily, but we definitely have one more task force meeting.
And I'll have an update from council between now and then, so we'll have some idea of where council is and direction.
And is that meeting going to be virtual or is it going to be embodied?
We're not sure yet, but we do have a scheduling poll out. So far, we have about half of the task force that has responded, and it looks like the majority is in favor of in-person with a hybrid option.
In person's great. It's just, I think initially on the schedule, you had said something like, way back when we all signed on and it's going to be virtual, last word be virtual, but
Yeah,
I think embodied is
I like that we would still have the hybrid option as we have. No one's joined us that way yet, but that would be an option for the folks who would prefer for the fourth day. But if you haven't yet filled out that survey, please do so we can get that date on everyone's calendar. I know our May calendars are starting to fill up.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting, the people who love the library, so many of them are my age group, my cohort age group, which looks at the right now or the, I don't want to change. I don't want to have to deal with that. But what the council is looking at, what the library is looking at is the future. And there is that whole area in Stafford and Metro is gonna have to look at that. And there's going to be, when I was involved in this stuff, there was talk about Stafford having home development and housing. And where would they go? Will they go to the Tualatin Library? Will they come to the Lake Oswego Library? There is a lot of area where development is still going to take place on the fringes around. And we think of Lake Oswego, but there's a lot of people who already use the library that come from outside that area. And I think they disbanded, right, the Clackamas County Library and sent the money from Clackamas County to each of the local city libraries that are, does Clackamas County still collect library funds?
They do, they are operating 2 libraries now, but you're right, they were going in that direction of, I think Happy Valley and Sandy each took one of the county-run libraries.
And so there's been some things out there already and about the financing model and everything that the council really needs to kind of take a look at going forward, 10, 15, 20 years from now, what's it going to be? Because libraries don't get built overnight.
Yeah.
All of this is going to take time, and I sorry that we had someone here who said, oh, well, that's not gonna happen for 20 years. When we were talking about the area down near the treatment plant. Well, if the treatment plant gets federal funding and they start developing that area down there, that's going to leave a lot of stuff in the auto yard and the stuff that doesn't look real great right now. It's going to be a prime place to develop more. That means probably apartments, means things for 1 and 2 and 3 people, not big family homes. There is opportunity here, and we have to look at where that population is going to be getting services from the city. And I think that's, maybe there's too many people who've answered this survey that are the here and now, and that are not the looking, because that's just the way it is. But it really is something we have to look at going forward, open up our vision of it.
Yeah, it's excellent.
Well said.
Kind of, we're right over time, guys, and I can tell there's so much passion in this room about what we're doing. We're not done yet, by the way. We still have more information to bring to you. We will get the slide deck that has all the data we saw this evening. But I just, kind of in closing, just again, thank you so much. Such a beautiful warm weather night. It's time. You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much. We'll be following up.
3 day.